What I observe unfolding in China's systematic deployment of hybrid civilian military assets around Taiwan represents nothing less than the emergence of a new form of warfare that operates below traditional military conflict thresholds while achieving strategic control objectives through legal manipulation, economic pressure, and incremental sovereignty erosion that circumvents international law frameworks and alliance response mechanisms designed for conventional military aggression. The intelligence assessments I have reviewed indicate that Chinese operations around Taiwan deliberately blur distinctions between civilian maritime activities and military operations while creating systematic facts on the ground that establish Chinese authority over Taiwanese territorial waters and airspace without triggering the clear military aggression that would activate American defense commitments and international intervention protocols. You know, what makes China's gray zone strategy particularly insidious is that it operates through systematic accumulation of small actions that individually appear benign or legally ambiguous, while collectively achieving comprehensive control over Taiwanese sovereignty and independence capabilities without ever crossing thresholds that would justify international military response or alliance intervention on Taiwan's behalf. The intelligence is clear, crystal clear, that Chinese Coast Guard vessels, fishing fleets, and merchant shipping coordinate systematic operations that establish persistent Chinese presence in Taiwanese territorial waters, while conducting what Beijing characterizes as legitimate law enforcement, fishing activities, and commercial navigation that international maritime law cannot clearly prohibit, while these activities systematically undermine Taiwanese authority and sovereignty. Congressional intelligence briefings reveal that Chinese legal warfare strategy operates through systematic exploitation of international law ambiguities, territorial water definitions, and maritime jurisdiction disputes that enable Chinese forces to establish operational control while maintaining plausible legal justifications for activities that gradually erode Taiwanese governmental authority and international recognition. Chinese operations coordinate Coast Guard enforcement actions, fishing fleet positioning, and commercial vessel routing to create systematic pressure on Taiwanese maritime operations while avoiding direct military confrontation that would trigger American defense obligations or justify international intervention under existing alliance frameworks. I think what we need to understand about this legal warfare dimension is that China is systematically redefining international law through operational precedent and fait accompli strategies that establish Chinese authority through persistent presence and enforcement activities rather than formal legal changes or military conquest that would require international recognition or treaty modifications. Chinese legal experts and military planners have developed comprehensive strategies for achieving territorial control through incremental sovereignty establishment that operates within existing international legal frameworks while systematically undermining the sovereign authorities these frameworks were designed to protect. But there is also the systematic economic warfare dimension that coordinates with legal and military pressure to create comprehensive coercion against Taiwan while providing economic incentives for international acceptance of Chinese territorial claims and sovereignty assertions. I am analyzing intelligence community assessments that detail Chinese coordination between gray zone military operations, economic pressure campaigns against Taiwanese businesses, and diplomatic initiatives that offer economic benefits to nations that accept Chinese territorial sovereignty over Taiwan while imposing economic costs on nations that continue supporting Taiwanese independence and sovereignty. What troubles me most profoundly about American response capabilities is that existing alliance frameworks and military planning assume clear distinctions between peace and war, civilian and military activities, and legal and illegal international behavior, while Chinese gray zone operations systematically blur these distinctions to achieve strategic objectives without triggering alliance response mechanisms or international law enforcement that traditional military aggression would activate. American military forces and alliance partners struggle to develop effective responses to Chinese activities that remain technically legal while achieving strategic objectives equivalent to military conquest through gradual sovereignty erosion. The intelligence community faces systematic challenges in assessing Chinese intentions, escalation trajectories, and strategic objectives, while Chinese gray zone operations maintain plausible civilian cover and legal justifications that prevent clear threat assessment and policy response formulation that conventional military intelligence analysis provides for traditional security challenges. Chinese operations coordinate multiple government agencies, civilian organizations, and commercial entities to create comprehensive pressure campaigns that exceed traditional intelligence collection and analysis frameworks designed for military threat assessment rather than hybrid legal military economic operations. Congressional oversight of Taiwan policy reveals systematic inadequacy of existing defense commitments, alliance frameworks, and international law mechanisms for addressing Chinese gray zone warfare that achieves strategic objectives without triggering clear defense obligations or international intervention authorities that Taiwan's security ultimately depends upon for protection against Chinese territorial expansion and sovereignty erosion. American policy frameworks assume clear military aggression scenarios while Chinese strategy achieves territorial control through systematic legal manipulation and incremental sovereignty establishment that operates beyond existing policy frameworks and defense planning. You know, when I analyze the broader implications for international law and territorial sovereignty, what becomes clear is that successful Chinese gray zone strategy around Taiwan provides systematic template for other territorial disputes and sovereignty challenges throughout the world where nations can achieve territorial expansion and control through legal warfare and hybrid operations rather than conventional military aggression that triggers international intervention and alliance response mechanisms. The escalation management implications include systematic risks that Chinese gray zone operations could trigger Taiwanese military responses or American intervention through accumulated provocations and sovereignty violations that cross undefined red lines while Chinese leadership maintains that their activities remain within legal boundaries and civilian authorities rather than military aggression that would justify international military response. Intelligence assessments indicate potential trigger scenarios, including Chinese detention of Taiwanese vessels, enforcement actions against Taiwanese government operations, or systematic exclusion of Taiwanese authorities from territorial waters and airspace. But there is also systematic opportunity for American policy innovation that addresses Chinese gray zone warfare through enhanced maritime cooperation with Taiwan, international law clarification, and alliance coordination that provides effective responses to hybrid operations while maintaining escalation control and regional stability that direct military confrontation with Chinese forces would jeopardize through great power conflict and regional warfare that exceeds American strategic objectives and alliance capabilities. I think what we need to recognize about the technological dimensions is that Chinese gray zone operations incorporate advanced surveillance systems, communications coordination, and precision navigation that enable systematic territorial control while maintaining civilian operational cover and legal justifications that prevent clear identification of military command structures and strategic coordination that would enable effective international response and deterrence measures. The regional alliance implications reveal systematic challenges for American security cooperation with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and other Indo-Pacific partners who face different vulnerability levels to Chinese economic pressure while maintaining varying military capabilities and political constraints regarding Taiwan defense and Chinese gray zone operations that require unprecedented alliance coordination and strategic integration for effective collective response to hybrid warfare scenarios. Congressional intelligence oversight faces systematic limitations in monitoring and assessing Chinese gray zone operations, while existing authorities and oversight mechanisms were designed for conventional military threats rather than hybrid legal military economic operations that blur traditional intelligence collection categories and analysis frameworks while creating systematic blind spots in threat assessment and policy response formulation that effective gray zone warfare deterrence would require. What makes Chinese strategy particularly effective for avoiding American intervention is that it operates through systematic coordination between legal interpretation, economic incentives, and military pressure that provides multiple justifications for Chinese activities while creating systematic costs for American or international intervention that exceed the apparent stakes of individual Chinese actions, while these actions collectively achieve strategic objectives equivalent to military conquest without clear military aggression. The economic warfare coordination includes systematic Chinese pressure on international shipping, commercial aviation, and multinational corporations to accept Chinese territorial claims and sovereignty assertions through operational compliance with Chinese maritime and airspace control, rather than legal recognition that would require formal international acceptance of Chinese territorial expansion and Taiwanese sovereignty elimination. Regional stability implications extend beyond immediate Taiwan security into systematic demonstration that territorial sovereignty and international law frameworks cannot prevent determined gray zone operations, while existing alliance systems and international institutions prove inadequate for addressing hybrid warfare that achieves strategic objectives through legal manipulation and incremental control establishment rather than conventional military aggression that international systems were designed to address and deter. Recovery scenarios for restoring Taiwanese sovereignty and territorial control require comprehensive legal warfare capabilities, alliance coordination mechanisms, and international law enforcement authorities that exceed current institutional capabilities, while Chinese gray zone control becomes increasingly difficult to reverse through diplomatic or military means that would not trigger comprehensive regional conflict and great power confrontation between American and Chinese forces. As I conclude this analysis, I recognize that China's gray zone warfare around Taiwan represents more than regional territorial dispute or military positioning, but rather systematic demonstration of new forms of warfare that operate beyond existing international legal frameworks and alliance response mechanisms while achieving strategic control objectives through hybrid operations that blur traditional distinctions between peace and war, civilian and military activities, and legal and illegal international behavior. The decisions made about legal warfare response capabilities, alliance coordination mechanisms, and international law enforcement authorities will determine whether existing international systems can adapt to hybrid warfare challenges, or whether gray zone operations become normalized methods for territorial expansion and sovereignty erosion that fundamentally alter international law and territorial sovereignty principles while demonstrating systematic inadequacy of existing institutional frameworks for protecting democratic nations and territorial integrity against sophisticated hybrid warfare campaigns.